Welcome back to Taylor's Movie Reviews, ladies and gentlemen. Today I wanted to talk about my brief thoughts on the Netflix original Next Gen. Next Gen kind of combines a lot of ideas I think we've seen before, but oftentimes a movie or a TV show doesn't need to be completely original in order to be interesting. So if I had to say what sort of the source material was for Next Gen, I would say it's a combination of iRobot, which is actually a movie I saw fairly recently that I think is a little bit underrated, Big Hero 6, which kind of plays into the design aesthetic and a lot of the superhero-esque moments of Next Gen, with a tad sprinkle of Iron Giant in there. So all of these movies kind of have something in common, and Next Gen kind of mishes them all together in a more modern way that kind of appeals more to today. So the plot is simple. It's basically a rebellious teen who's living in the future, who's not really fitting in school with very much, and definitely doesn't enjoy her home life or society very much because we're living in a future where everything is about having robots built into it, which I thought was kind of interesting social commentary. I definitely get to the point now with Alexa microwaves coming out or smart $100 toothbrushes coming out where I feel like everything, like the new shtick of modern day is just everything needs to be a robot. Everything needs to be Bluetooth enabled and HomeKit supported. And sometimes we forget that maybe we're so excited with putting robots into things and we're not really realizing that it doesn't really make a difference and it just kind of makes life a bit more complicated. But in this world, this teenage girl is basically the only one recognizing that. So she's not a fan of all the robots, but this is definitely a movie that I found tonally a little confusing because there's certain parts of the film where things get very, very dark and, in all honesty, probably just unrealistic, but it is animated and it is probably catering to a younger demographic of some sort. But there are other parts in the movie where things get very, very dark, especially with the antagonist and his giant bodyguard robot who's quite scary and near the end of the film gets quite intimidating and a little bit more zombie-like. I'm not going to intentionally spoil the film for you, but I'll just admit that there's not much to spoil. There's not really a giant reveal or a giant twist. The little twist that there is, I won't talk about because I don't really need to. But my point is, there are certain parts of the film that feel very, very dark, like when, for instance, a bully at this girl's school asks her assistive robots to hold down the protagonist limb by limb so that the bully can punch them. And I was amazed that they followed the bully's commands. I feel like there wasn't enough of the presence of that iRobot script where all AI and all robots that are helping humanity have to follow certain rules of you can't hurt a human, you can't disobey a human, and you have to listen to whatever a human tells you unless you're asking them to break the first rule. So I guess those three rules of robotics didn't quite exist in this universe, and there's some really dangerous things you could ask robots to do here. But once again, you have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit and say, well, this is for a more young audience and not really supposed to be a Black Mirror in the form of animation. But it definitely gets very dark and also very lighthearted depending on the moment, because there's some really, really funny scenes in this movie, like when the mom asks the main character to brush her teeth, then they just kind of look up and then there's just this evil toothbrush whose whole mindset and whole heart and soul is devoted to making sure he brushes this girl's teeth. And he gets very dark about it, which is funny, and they have a whole fight scene about it, as well as it wouldn't be a classic animation princess story if our princess didn't have a sidekick animal, which Michael Pena plays a little bulldog in this movie, which oftentimes finds getting his head stuck in between doors, and there's a little bit of slapstick humor in that way, and a lot of the robots sometimes, are trying to be firm and trying to be direct as they can, but they have to stay optimistic, like, please, follow me immediately, you cannot disobey me, and there's a lot of comedic moments in it, but the main star of the show is John Krasinski, who stars the robot, and I had a very hard time disconnecting that from Jim from The Office, because I've seen The Office literally so many times, but I think as an optimistic voice for a robot, John Krasinski actually did a pretty good job, and this is kind of a rebel robot, which is where the similarities come between our main character and this robot. They're different from everyone else. John Krasinski's character is going through an issue because he never was really supposed to be outside the factory. The scientists who are definitely in this movie trying to replicate the Apple keynote-esque, people getting pumped for new technology and people getting pumped to pay thousands of dollars for new, slightly better tech. There was a lot of good social commentary here and there, but John Krasinski's robot is different. He can think for himself and he actually has a lot of weapons, but as soon as he escapes from the factory, he has a corrupted hard drive, so he's not able to save that many memories. And this is what I thought was a bit more interesting part of the film, because every night, our main character has to lock up this robot in a shed so that no one knows where he is and she can keep him for himself. He has to decide which memories he wants to forget, and I think there were some interesting character moments that resembled a lot of show, not tell. He's not thinking out loud, I don't want to forget that memory of us us playing soccer together, but I also don't like remembering that time she didn't like me and disrespected me. You don't need to say that out loud. It's all in the eyes. And in this place, it's a robot with circles. And just with those two little pixelated circles are able to tell a whole story of this personality that John Krasinski plays, of a robot that loves these memories and is loving being outside the factory and is getting to know this person more and more and more. But at the same time, do you want to forget the times in your life where people were mean to you? Because maybe you had something to learn from that outbreak. When someone yelled at you or someone ranted at you, you learn from that experience, and you're gonna want to remember that, hold on to that, to understand this is a core example of what kind of person you're talking to. This is a core example of your relationship, because this person's willing to say these types of things to you. Really interesting, deep stuff for what on the surface looks like a kid's movie, and it probably is kid-friendly for the most part, despite there being a lot of dark and gruesome scenes. The whole disagreement between our main character and the robot comes from the stem of she wants to get back to the people who bullied her at school by showing that she's got the better robot that will do whatever she says and destroy the bullies' robots and fight the system, break the system, shoot the police robots. And that part of the film when everyone's on a highway and there's a lot of robotic police now, like humans aren't police officers anymore, got me WALL-E flashbacks. So what I want people to know going into Next Gen is that it definitely feels like a recipe from lots of different movies. They took bits and pieces of different animated robot films and mashed them all together, which honestly, all the robot films that they took from are good movies, and no surprise at all, putting good things together actually does result in kind of good things. So there's a lot of disagreements between the main character and John Krasinski, and they have to work that out, and they definitely kind of fall into the formula of they lose respect for one another, there's a falling out, there comes a point where to save the main character, our main John Krasinski robot has to decide which part of his brain he wants to get rid of, what he wants to erase from his memory, and that's tough, and it ends up being a sacrifice story. But overall, I think there's a pretty happy ending, and I like movies that are able to resolve themselves. It's not overly complicated, it's not my favorite animated film ever, but for a Netflix original with this high budget animation and this really high quality, beautiful aesthetic of how they see the future, I gotta give this movie high props and say I recommend you guys watch it. I imagine most of you have Netflix. I like reviewing Netflix movies because that's a pretty wide open window that a lot of you can watch like that. So yeah, Next Gen for a Netflix original does a pretty good job at taking a lot from previous source material, but then adding a spice of realism to it and social commentary on today, while still being somewhat familiar and not too out of the ordinary to the point that it's completely experimental. It's by no means experimental. This plays it by the books in a lot of different ways. But yeah, overall, I really think you guys should give it a watch. Have you seen Next Gen? Have you checked it out? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you all have an excellent day. Take care.